I wanted to speak this week, Parshat Vayetse, about Yossi Hershkowitz. Yossi, as I'm sure many people have seen on the news, Yossi Zichrono Livracha fell in battle in Gaza. Yossi's wife Hadass, I got to know through the Sachs Scholars. She worked for the Israeli side of the Sachs Scholars. She herself an amazing woman, and over the Shabbat that we had a retreat for the Sachs Scholars in the summer, Yossi joined us, and it was clear from even a brief encounter that he was a unique person. They say in Hebrew the phrase Melech Haaretz. He was a man who was really the soul of the land. But when I was listening to the radio the other day, I heard the presenters talking about Yossi, and one of them described his visit to the Shiva. And he said that as he sat there listening to these incredible stories about him, he kept thinking, what's between this, but ma beini leveino, what's between me and him? You know, this man sounds like an angel. He was the principal of a boys school, Pelech in Yerushalayim. He was an incredible human being. Every story that comes out showed something very unique about this person. And then he said, and then all of a sudden, someone told a story of how a student in the university played a trick. When he was a student in university, he played a trick on his friends, and he persuaded his friend to enter some kind of lottery where the winning prize was a subscription to Haaretz newspaper. But Yossi's friend refused to do it, and Yossi kept pushing him. And after a few days, the friend got a phone call to say he'd won, and the friend was amazed, and he ran to tell Yossi. And for 3 days, a newspaper was delivered outside his door at 5 a.m. On day 4, it didn't come. So the friend called up Haaretz to complain. And the woman at the other end of the phone said, I know what you're talking about. You didn't win the competition. There's no subscription here for you. All of a sudden, he realized that Yossi had been pranking him. He called him to tell him he'd won. He woke up at 5 o'clock every morning to make sure that the newspaper was by his door. And the presenter turned around and said, at that point, I realized that he was exactly like you and me, a fun, normal guy who happened to choose to do extraordinary things in his life. And that's what made him so great. When Yaakov leaves his family, he doesn't only go into exile geographically, but he also, in a sense, goes into exile from himself. Person he thought he was, the Ishtam Yoshev Ohalim, the man of the tent, the man in which the spirituality, in which the learning Torah, as we're told by the commentaries, was within his tent, was within that closed, boundary bidden reality. And he leaves all of that because he becomes someone, in some senses, he doesn't recognize. He betrays himself when he betrays his father and his brother. He betrays his own self-image. And he becomes, in a sense, an ordinary person who goes out into the world. But he doesn't believe that God, or he doesn't seem to see that God is with him anymore or accompanying him until he stops in the boundaryless place between two places where the sun is invited to set. And he dreams of a ladder between heaven and earth, with angels going up and down the ladder. And when he wakes up from his dream, he exclaims, Chen yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh v'anochi lo yadati. Could it be that God is in this place and I didn't know? The unexpectedness of the encounter with the divine in the place of no structure, of no boundaries, in the place that isn't the tent, that isn't the fulcrum of spirituality, place where there's chaos, where there's mundane, where there's uncertainty. Is God there? Is that where he can find God? And the answer is yes. Indeed, in that place, God is to be found. Judaism is not a religion that seeks withdrawal from the world, but instead it's a religion that convenes in the nitty-grittiness of lived life. We, as a covenantal people and in a covenantal way, are instructed to create holiness and intuit divinity in the patterns of life lived in this world. When Jacob becomes that ordinary person, someone who isn't totally pure, dwelling in the confines of a life cut off, but actually in the openness of a life lived in reality, even in exile, that's when he really becomes the person he needs to be, the leader he needs to be. He in his dream, he's compelled to look at himself from a different perspective. Literally, is portrayed in one of Chagall's paintings. He sees himself from a totally different perspective. He's very often we get used to our narrative, our story, our accepted self-perception, even our suffering. We get used to looking at ourselves from a certain perspective, but sometimes we need to be forced to see ourselves from a different perspective. The same with the world. Very often we get used to the dynamic of the world in which we live, where that we don't see God or we don't intuit transcendence. Sometimes it takes a change, a shift paradigm, a shift perspective for us to see God, to see revelation, even in the places that are the darkest and the hardest and the most challenging. Perhaps that's what we can learn from Yaakov, that at times we need to step back and look at reality in a different way, from a different perspective, in order to detect the divine footprints and the human angels that really are present in our world. We need to break down the borders, the wall, the constructs, the paradigm, the tent that we build up and that we reside in. And yes, the chaos, the open space, the madness in order that sometimes permeates our reality can only then, in that darkness, in the journey to the darkness, there we can dream of the ladder between heaven and earth. There we can dream of a reality that we want to see once again. And then after the 20 years that Yaakov travels in that darkness, he finally returns and the sun rises again. We pray for that time where we too will return and the sun too will rise again. May it be soon and may it be fast.